And last Sunday, we left him after he had been falsely accused of sexual aggression against the wife of Potiphar. And he was thrown in prison. And if you remember back earlier, whenever he was pulled in to be the manager of Potiphar's household, it told us that Potiphar was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. And so we find this morning that Joseph now is in jail, in custody. And so injustice is being done. He is the recipient of that, and we're going to look at how he has responded to that. And the emphasis today is, regardless of injustices that come upon us, and they come on us all, we need to continue pushing forward in the Lord's will and serving Him. Our passages this morning are Genesis chapter 39, parts of it, and also chapter 40. We all find ourselves from time to time in less than ideal circumstances. A rainy day at the beach is one thing, but sometimes those circumstances have far greater impact on our lives, such as a dead-end job. We can feel like our dreams are gone or the world has passed us by. The book of Genesis shows us Joseph, a man whose circumstances were far from ideal. He had been forgotten and left in prison, yet he was not defeated by his circumstances. So the setting is Joseph had been put in jail for a crime he did not commit. The wife of Potiphar, his Egyptian master, tried repeatedly to seduce him, but he never gave in to her attempts. Enraged over his refusal to have a sexual relationship with her, she accused him of attempting to rape her. Consequently, Potiphar had Joseph thrown into prison. Wrongfully accused, Joseph had to work through the injustice that made him a criminal behind bars. So let's look at this first passage of Scripture, Genesis 39, verses 21 through 23, and read that together. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. So Joseph was thrown into prison. Now, later in the next section, as we read, we find that this prison is under the charge of Potiphar. He is the captain of the guard, which had been told to us earlier. I had missed that in previous times when I've read that. But it is under Potiphar's responsibilities, but of course he has a warden, I guess we'd call him, a keeper of the prisoners. And so a little speculation comes in here. This is speculation. It's not in the Scriptures. Potiphar was very impressed with Joseph. So impressed with him that he put his entire household under his care. Now, he responded to his wife's accusation and put Joseph in prison. I mean, Joseph was a slave anyway, so no great empathy, if you will, for him. And Joseph surely did not say, "Your wife is a liar." That would not have been good at all. I mean, if he did, maybe that's why he was in prison. I don't know. But anyway, he was put in the prison, but the prison was the prison of the Pharaoh's prison, and it was the prison that Potiphar was in charge of. And so, can you just imagine hearing this conversation as he puts this guy in the prison, and he says, "Now this prisoner is really a sharp guy. He manages things very well. He managed my house well, and yeah, maybe he did something wrong, but he is really sharp in doing administrative tasks and overseeing things that you give him. and he's really faithful in doing it. I've always had a question. How long was Joseph in there before the warden finally realized all of these things? I mean, wardens don't usually pay any attention to the prisoners. They're just there to subject them to punishment. But it makes sense that if Potiphar is in charge of the prisons as his administrative responsibility, but he's given this responsibility to a warden, of course, then it would be that as he puts this guy, sends this guy to prison, and the warden says, now what's he done? Well, my wife says he tried to rape her. But you know, this guy's really a sharp guy, and he might be of help to you. So it makes sense that all of that could have transpired, and the warden says, well, I will see. I will watch him. And so he observes Joseph and what he does, and he realizes that Joseph is really a very dependable person. So the warden, verse 22, the warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority. That sounds exactly like what Potiphar did when he put everything in Potiphar's house under Joseph's authority. And he was responsible. He was responsible. That's a big statement. He was responsible. A lot of people are given a job and they're not responsible. My daughter wrote the other day and said, I drove by, and I don't know if it was a Taco Bell or whatever, and they were advertising for helpers. You know, they're taking job applications. It says, looking for someone who will work. You know, if you're hiring somebody, you want somebody who will work, not just come in and fill a place and try to draw a salary. And I said, that says a lot. When he says, looking for workers, no, that's not what he said. Looking for someone who will work. And whenever a job was given to Joseph, he would work. He was responsible for everything that was done there. And it just sounds like somebody had put a bug in his ear, so to speak, that this guy really is good. He really is dependable. He really is faithful. He really knows how to manage things, and he does whatever it is that you ask him to do. So the warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority. You remember? Under Potiphar, in Potiphar's house, it said, and so Potiphar didn't concern himself with anything except what?
He ate.
What he was eating. Yeah. He ordered the food. He told us that this is what I want for lunch and for supper, etc. today, I guess. So the warden did not bother with anything that was under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. So the Lord was leading him, but Joseph was carrying out the responsibility as a responsible person, even though he had been falsely accused and put in prison. Now, I shared this with Adele this morning. In reflecting on this is not saying, now whenever you face injustice, this is the way you should act. There is not that teaching in it. This is simply a biographical telling us of how a person under God's leadership responds. But if you want to see teachings that say this is the way you should act, then go to Matthew chapter 5 and 6 and 7, where Jesus says, if you're unjustly accused and they ask for a cloak, do what?
Give it to them.
Give them that one and one more. If they ask you to carry their load, their burden, their whatever they're carrying, carry it 1 mile, what do? Carry it 2. That's right. That's clear teaching from Jesus for us. Whenever you face injustice, this is how you would act. Well, actually, Joseph had never heard this. So Joseph is still doing what God was going to later tell us verbally through Jesus, how we should act in the face of injustice. And so, Jesus also said, be humble, be merciful, be kind, and so on. And so the teachings of Jesus are very straightforward and clear in this respect. But Joseph's life that we're looking at is an example of what it looks like and how God blesses people who face uncertainty and injustice in their life. That would apply to us. But this doesn't mean that we have to respond just like Joseph does. We need to respond how Jesus has taught us to respond. And so the warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority. He had come to implicitly trust him because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. Any questions here? Okay, let's look at some questions. In what ways does this episode parallel Joseph's rise to success in Potiphar's house? Do you see some parallels here?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yes. And what are they?
Well, everything he did worked out well.
And he was faithful in everything.
He was fair and just
Yeah.
and faithful in all he did.
Okay. What evidence suggests that Joseph made diligent effort even in dark circumstances? The warden, how did he look at Joseph?
The same way Potiphar did.
With
Yeah, he trusted him, didn't he? He would assign him responsibility, and it said, and Joseph carried that responsibility. He did that responsibly. Ultimately, to what was Joseph's success to be attributed?
God.
Yeah, the Lord was
leadership.
blessing him, and the Lord was leading him, and whatever it was that he did under the Lord's leadership was successful. So some lessons here. Despite all appearances, we can count on the Lord to be with us. Joseph is an example. Joseph had been betrayed by his brothers. Excuse me. I have a Korean friend that keeps texting me a message. That's what just popped up.
Be careful, Mama can read it.
I mean, it's good. Yeah, it's a good. He just says, "Hey, how are you doing? Where are you? You know, how's life going with you?" That kind of is a pastor, so I don't fear what he says. I just that little circle that pops up there. Okay. Despite all appearances, we can count on the Lord to be with us in difficult circumstances, in chaotic circumstances, in unexpected circumstances. And I don't know what to do with this kinds of circumstances. Whatever it is, we can trust that the Lord is with us and that he will lead us and that he will use us and bless us. Even whenever it looks like it's a dark tunnel and we will never get through it. When we do get through it, and we will, and look back, we will say, you know, he led me all the way. The Lord is a God of mercy, and he's merciful to us. Even in difficulty, we are to continue to use the abilities that God has given us. And he's given every one of us abilities to serve him. The New Testament calls those gifts for service. He's given each one of us. And even in the difficult circumstances, he wants us to continue to use those gifts to honor him. God will bring blessing to those who are faithful to him. And we may not see those blessings, or we may not recognize those blessings immediately, but we can believe that God is blessing us and will bless us. And when we get through it and look back, we will see the blessings that he gives us. One of the favorite books that I've read across the years, and I haven't looked at it in a number of years, but remember what it says, is Blessings Out of Buffetings. By a man named Redhill. Blessings out of buffetings. Yes, sometimes in our buffetings, in our difficulties that rise upon us, there will be blessings that come through that. So then let's look at the next passage. Genesis chapter 40, verses 4 through 8. And let's read that together. The captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. The king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker, who were confined in the prison, each had a dream. Both had a dream on the same night,
And
and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked distraught. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We had dreams," they said to him, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Now, the background of this is, while Joseph was in prison, the baker and the cupbearer of Pharaoh, personal attendants to Pharaoh, had done something, and it never tells us what they had done. And the Pharaoh sent them to this prison. And so here they are, assigned to the prison where, notice, the captain of the guards, who is that? That's Potiphar. Remember how we seen earlier, about 2 chapters earlier, it says Potiphar was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. So the captain of the guards, in other words, he knew that these two were high officials, in essence. They held a high position, a personal position, appointed by Pharaoh. And they were sent to prison. And so he says to the captain of the captain of the guards says, "Assign these men to Joseph for him to be their personal attendant." Their personal attendant. Usually you think of personal attendant as somebody that is beneath you, right? Like a butler is a person on call to whoever is the owner or the master of the house. Well, these two were looked at by the captain of the guard. He said, perhaps, now this is speculation. I mean, these two men were with Pharaoh every day. The cupbearer always tasted the wine before Pharaoh drank it to be sure it wasn't poison. The baker always tasted the bread that his people had baked for Pharaoh to prove that it was not contaminated or poisoned. And so these two men were responsible for the food that Pharaoh ate to be sure that poison hadn't been slipped in and somebody was trying to kill off the Pharaoh and change the ruler. So these two officials were high officials. I mean, they saw Pharaoh every day, at every meal, every time he wanted a cup of wine. These two men were there. The captain of the guard didn't have that access. He could probably only go into Pharaoh whenever he was called. But these men were not called. They were, whenever mealtime came, they went to serve him. So these two were high officials. Now, here's my speculation. The captain of the guard says, these men are in presence of Pharaoh all the time. If they are reinstated and I don't treat them right, and they're not treated right in prison, then they might be filling Pharaoh's ear with things about me. And so he is cautious. This is my speculation. He's cautious how these prisoners are going to be treated. So he assigns a personal assistant to be their assistant. And who is that? It's Joseph. He knew he could trust Joseph. And he knew that Joseph would do it well. And so he assigns Joseph to be these two prisoners' personal assistant. Evidently, no one else in that prison had a personal assistant. I mean, we don't see anyone else assigned as a personal assistant. Joseph had been a personal assistant to the warden, but now he's assigned as a personal assistant to these two, to the cupbearer and the baker. Because the king of Egypt had confined them in the prison. While they were confined in the prison, and we have no idea how long they were. But they had a dream. Each of them had a dream on the same night, but the dreams were different. And when Joseph comes to see them the next morning, evidently I'm guessing that these two men had already shared. I know I had a dream last night. I have no idea what it means. The other says, I did too. So then they get to go, what'd you dream? Well, okay, and what did you dream? And so they shared these dreams together, I would assume. And so their face was downcast, because they had no idea what they meant. They could have asked, what do you think that means? I had no idea what that means. And they say they were distraught, and it showed in their face. Joseph paid attention to the people that were under his care. We see this as another of the qualities of Joseph. You know, some people you can meet, and they never pay any attention to your countenance, what you're doing, or anything else. But Joseph had the ability, had the innate ability that God had given him, that he paid attention to people. Evidently, he didn't pay any attention to his brothers, because he would have seen that they had malice in their eyes. Maybe it was even there that he began to learn. As he became a servant, he began to learn how to look and judge a person. Koreans have a special word for that, don't they? Call it nunchi. You know what nunchi is?
Nucci, do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It means measuring the eyes, right? Checking the eyes, looking people in the eye and discerning their spirit. We don't have that word. We have to make a whole sentence about it to explain it. You know, you judge people's countenance, if you will. But he was good at nunchi, if you will. He could discern people's mood through watching their eyes and through their countenance. And so he says, why are you looking so distraught, so upset, so ill at ease, so lack of no joy in your life? And so he asked the officers who were in custody with him, why do you look so sad today? And they said, we had dreams. And there's no one to interpret these dreams. And Joseph says, interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. Now, what does that mean? Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams.
That God is working through him.
Yeah, I mean, it is. He recognized God used him to interpret dreams, right? That's very clear. There's no interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. In other words, God will tell me and I will tell you. Interpretations belong to God. He tells me and I will interpret your dreams. So between that, interpretations belong to God and tell me your dreams, between those two sentences, there's a lot of meaning there. Joseph knew that God was in his life. He knew that God had given him this ability. He knew that God was with him. Whatever he was doing, he could look back and see how he had led him in Potiphar's life. He could even look back and see how he had transgressed against his brothers and how they had transgressed against him. He was a reflective person, and he had discovered about himself one of those gifts that God had given him, and that was hearing and explaining the dreams. You know, he also was a dreamer, if you will. You remember the dreams that he had? Two of them that he mentions. One that his brothers bowed down to him, remember? And the other one was that not only his brothers, but his mother and father also bowed down to him. His problem was he told the dreams to his family. And that they didn't need much interpretation of what that meant. And so they took offense with that. Tell me your dreams. Now let's look at some questions here. What two court officials had joined Joseph in prison?
The cupbearer and the baker.
Okay. And in addition to being in prison, what else caused these men to be troubled?
Dreams.
Yeah, their dream. Each of them. What words or actions suggest Joseph was sensitive to and concerned about their well-being?
He asked them, what's wrong?
Well, but he noticed it. What did he say to them? Why are you so
Distraught.
sad? Why are you so distraught? Yeah. He was paying attention to these people who he had been placed as a personal assistant. So some lessons. Even during our trying times, others too face their own difficulties. Now notice this, Joseph is a prisoner. He does not have freedom to leave. He is in a prison. And yet, he is giving his attention to those that has been put in his charge. He is giving attention to serving the warden and taking care of the prisoners. He is a prisoner himself, but a trusted prisoner. And so, instead of introvertedly focusing on his own situation, he instead uses his abilities in spite of where he is, in spite of the difficulties that have been brought upon him, to serve others. So even during our trying time, others too have their own difficulties, and that is when we can focus on them and serve the Lord as we serve them. Our difficulties are not to be an excuse for ignoring others who are troubled. God is to be given credit for the good that we do, since it is only by His grace to us that we are able to do good at all. So then, let's look at the next passage. Genesis chapter 40, verses 20 through 23. Let me turn my page here. And so, let's read these together. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all his servants. He elevated the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had explained to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And so Joseph, in talking with the cupbearer and the baker, he hears their dreams. They tell him their dreams. And Joseph interprets the dreams to them. The cupbearer says, can you repeat the dream? Let me ask you. Do you remember the cupbearer's dream? No one remember it?
I don't.
One was cows and one was grass or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know which was which.
So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said, in my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. And so Joseph then interprets the dream, and he says, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. That's the only time that we hear a word of, I need help. Get me out of this prison. For I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. He was not oblivious to the injustice that had been brought upon him by his brothers, by the slave owners, by Potiphar, and then because of Potiphar's wife. I mean, it would look like everything was going bad. He was not oblivious to that. But in spite of that, he served responsibly. So to the cupbearer, he gives a favorable report. Within 3 days, you're going to see you'll be restored. And then when the chief baker, this was in chapter 40, verse 16, it's not in our text. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he says to Joseph, I too had a dream on my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating him out of the basket. on my head. And so this is what it means. Joseph said, the 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Now, he was straight with him, wasn't he? I mean, that would be not a favorable report. And so the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. He gave a feast for all of his officials, and then the verse 20 and following that we just read. So Joseph hears these 2 dreams and he interprets them. One is a favorable report of encouragement to the cupbearer, and the other one is an unfavorable report to the baker. And so we see in the verses that we read, verse 20 through 23, it was Pharaoh's birthday on that 3rd day, and he gave a feast. And when he gave a feast, evidently he invited the cupbearer and the baker, who were prisoners, to the feast. And so then it says he elevated the chief, or he lifted the head, is literally what it says. He lifted the head of the chief cupbearer. In other words, he restored him. And his head could come back up, not hung in shame, whatever it was that he had done. And also the chief baker among his servants. I mean, they could be proud, and they thought, okay, maybe things are going to work out okay. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. So that day, at the birthday celebration, this cupbearer was restored, and not only that, he tasted the wine and he gave it to Pharaoh to drink. He was again serving in that position. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had explained to him. But you remember the one thing that he requested of the cupbearer whenever he interpreted the dream?
Remember me.
Remember me to Pharaoh and tell him what I have done to interpret this dream for you. In verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Another injustice, I would think, perhaps. My quarterly says that's not fair. Well, you know, this world is not fair. I didn't particularly like that way he put it. It was unfortunate. But you know, whenever you serve people, sometimes they forget. They forget that you helped them or that you did something for them or whatever. The cupbearer was one of those. He was told ahead of time, you're going to be restored. And when he was restored, he was so excited, he forgot. And he forgot completely. He didn't even think about it anymore. So, we do face uncertainties, we do face discrimination, we do face injustices, all of us, in our life. But in spite of those, we need to serve the Lord with what He has given us to serve Him. So let's look at some questions. What is the special occasion described in these verses?
Pharaoh's birthday.
What happened to the chief butler and the chief baker? Well, one was restored and one was hung. What is the reason that could have led Joseph to be disappointed?
The cupbearer forgot to.
Yeah. He'd asked a special favor, and the cupbearer forgot. So some lessons. Our best efforts and commitment to others may go unnoticed and unrewarded. Unnoticed and unrewarded. Have you ever experienced that? You gave your best, and nobody ever noticed it. Joseph faced that in this particular instance. The lack of concern and neglect by others brings disappointment, and we can be engulfed in that disappointment. Or we can push through that disappointment, not ever forgetting it. Perhaps Joseph didn't forget it. He actually named the times that he had been disappointed. But he pushed through that and continued to serve the Lord with the abilities that God had given him. Even if others forget and fail us, we can be encouraged by knowing the Lord will never forget us or fail us. And that's what we need to hold on to is even when we face a discouragement, we need to look to the Lord and know that the Lord will bless us. I mean, you can think through many different scenarios of what if the cupbearer had said something favorable to Pharaoh? Would that have changed anything?
I don't know.
But whenever the circumstance got right, whenever the Pharaoh had dreams and he didn't know how to interpret them, it was at that time that the cupbearer remembered. And even though the dream interpreters that were there to help Pharaoh couldn't interpret the dreams, the cupbearer remembered, I forgot. There was one that interpreted for me, and he can do it. And it may be that he remembered just at the right time. So, some application. How about us? How will you respond when you stand at the edge of the pitfall of injustice? How will you respond? Discouragement? Disappointment?
Dr. Border,
Yes.
We follow Joseph example by taking each small task and doing your big.
That's right. We take each task and do our best in that. That's exactly what Joseph has done. Is he takes these small tasks, they look like small tasks, but God makes them into tasks that bring blessings. So how will we respond? We need to continue the tasks that God has given us. How will you avoid the pitfall of being tempted to refuse to use your skills and resources after you've been burned in a previous situation? How will you do that?
You pray for a good attitude and stay in the Lord's will.
That's right. And you stay sensitive to the Holy Spirit's leadership. How do you manage disappointment, anger, resentment, and sadness when you have not been treated fairly?
I
The
have a
same way.
hissy fit.
I'm sorry?
I said I have a hissy fit.
Joseph didn't have a hissy fit. No. No.
You just pray about it.
Yeah, pray
Leave it
about it.
there.
That's right.
There with the Lord.
That's right.
I cry and then know that things will get better.
I was gonna say that too.
How do you find affirmation even if others fail to notice or acknowledge the good work you've done? How do you deal with that?
You know, when we do what we can for the Lord, you know, some of us can do a lot, some of us can do just a little, but it comes from our heart, and the Lord blesses us. So, we get affirmation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the Lord's gonna bless you as long as you do it with your real heart.
You know, Jesus says, when you pray, go into your closet and pray. He says to the Pharisees and scribes, you tithe your mint and your cumin and all of that. Yeah, you should do that, but you do it before people. You get your reward, and those who do it quietly get their reward from the Lord. So there's a lot of New Testament teaching that coincides with exactly how it is that Joseph responds to this. Joseph is just an example for us to see how that can work out in our lives. At that moment, the cupbearer forgot him, and Joseph knew it. Evidently, nothing happened. But at the appropriate time, God brought all of that together and blessed him. Who would have thought, who would have even considered that this slave boy of 17, taken to Egypt against his will, would become next to the Pharaoh? A very improbable story, but a very real story, because God was at work in this young man's life and overall for all of Israel. We need to continue doing what it is that God has called us to do, faithfully doing whether anyone else perceives it or not, to do it as unto the Lord.
Our daughter's favorite saying is, and I've heard her many times, it's in God's hands and it's in God's timing.
That's right.
Yes.
What is a particular lesson you gleaned from this study of how Joseph faced unjust treatment, even while he did what was right? What do you take away from this?
He was very loyal to the Lord and he believed in the guidance from the Lord.
Yeah, he did. And it's never stated that,
No.
but you look at what he does. I mean, even his statement is, interpretations belong to God, tell me your dreams. All right there is a conscious acknowledgement that God was in his life and leading him, protecting him, keeping him, and blessing him. And we can also do the same. We may not be interpreters of dreams, but God has given each one of us gift or gifts to serve him. And we all need to be faithful in using those gifts to bring glory and honor to God, and that we can be obedient to the Lord. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you love us and that you have endowed us, blessed us with gifts of the Holy Spirit to serve you. Whether it be with administration or singing or serving or whatever it is that you have gifted us with. Lord, help us to be faithful in serving you and bringing glory and honor to your name as we use our gifts to serve in your name and bring honor to you. Thank you for the examples of Joseph, and help us to take away from this how it is that we too can serve you sometimes in the midst of difficulty, of chaos, of sadness, and of